I used to think ownership was a stack of neat rectangles. Deeds, plats, tax receipts, each one a fence you could hold in your hand. Then, somewhere between a stapler's bite and a fluorescent bulb's hum, I learned paperwork is less a fence than a flood. It doesn't stop at your property line. It finds the lowest point and fills it. I'm an engineer by trade. That means I trust lines, tolerances, the quiet logic of things that either fit or don't. But there's a physics to bureaucracy no instrument can measure. Momentum from repetition, pressure from signatures, velocity from as per section, and the mass of a binder dropped on a desk like a verdict. The first tremor wasn't a machine. It was an email. The subject line said Beautification Initiative. And that's how a neighborhood that already looked perfect began its slow collapse. Under the weight of its own perfectionism. It began with one woman, and one clause that should never have existed. Karen Lowell didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Control is quieter than that. It lives in agendas attached to invitations. In bullet points that look harmless at first glance. In meetings that start on time because everyone is already too polite to question the clock. I knew Karen before I really knew her. She was our HOA president. The kind of woman who jogged before sunrise. Clipboard tucked under one arm like a devotional text. Her stride was efficient. Her ponytail symmetrical. Even her shadow looked punctual. She was order personified. If neatness were weather, she would have been the high-pressure system that kept the skies empty. The email arrived on a Tuesday. It invited us to a special community session at the clubhouse. The subject line was cheerful. The attachment was not. Maintenance Compliance Amendment, it read, followed by an ellipsis that felt sharp enough to draw blood. I printed it because I print everything. I highlight, I annotate, I measure. My desk is a shore where papers wash up and stay. I circled phrases like non-conforming appearance, consistent streetscape, and remedy for chronic neglect. The language wore a calm face, but under it crawled a hunger, the kind that eats difference and calls it improvement. I live in one of the oldest houses on our street. A low brick box built in the 70s. Stubborn, simple, heavy. The bricks are rough-edged, the color of dried blood and clay. They catch light differently from the new developments. Their surfaces pitted with years. I replaced the roof when it was time. I keep my trees trimmed, my gutters clear. But the bricks, those I left untouched, they're the house's memory. And I've always believed that erasing memory makes a home lighter. But hollower, the clubhouse that night smelled like carpet cleaner and quiet triumph. Rows of folding chairs, a water pitcher, a bowl of matching pens, symmetry masquerading as fairness. Karen stood by the projector, smiling that managerial smile. The one that says she's already decided, but will let you believe you were heard. The slide read, Maintenance Compliance Amendment, Enhancing Community Value Through Consistency. The words marched down the screen like soldiers made of serif. Upkeep expectations. Approved materials list. Provisions for remedy. Removal of unsafe or non-conforming structures as a last resort. The room nodded, hypnotized by bullet points. Nobody said Demolition Clause. Not yet, but I saw it hiding there. A seed under the mulch, already germinating. I took notes the way I breathe. Unsafe per whom? Non-conforming equals appearance. Questions are small acts of resistance. And resistance in that room felt impolite. Outside, the evening had turned syrupy and still. Porch lights flickered on like synchronized obedience. As I walked home, my house looked almost defiant. Its rough brick glowing in the amber streetlight. A fossil among veneers. I ran my hand over the wall. Felt grit give under my fingers. And wondered if Karen had ever touched something. She couldn't polish. A week later, the vote appeared online. A slick portal. Infographics. Smiling stock families in front of sterilized lawns. Checkboxes disguised as democracy. At the bottom it asked, "Do you agree to adopt the amendment?" I hovered over the box, not because I was undecided, but because silence sometimes feels heavier than a no. I closed the page. Unvoted, unread, unresolved. The results came 3 days later. Amendment passes, 68% in favor. Corinne's name anchored the bottom of the newsletter, her signature looping like a cul-de-sac. No entrance, no exit. The demolition clause was law now, and I could already hear its machinery idling somewhere in the future. At first, the letters were harmless. Friendly reminders. Notices about mailbox colors, approved mulch types, and the importance of curb appeal. But the pace quickened. A rhythm emerged. A mechanical pulse of warning and compliance. The process had found its pattern. And patterns don't stop, they complete. Then came the first real notice. Printed on heavy stock, the kind that wants to feel expensive. The HOA crest embossed at the top, an oak leaf and roofline. Symbol of polite tyranny. It told me my brick facade was non-conforming with the approved materials palette. It mentioned mortar discoloration inconsistent with community standards. And it gave me 60 days to fix it. I placed the letter under a small stone on my desk. A fragment of concrete I'd found years ago when repairing the front step. I liked that it'd weight. It made the paper stop pretending it was stronger than me. I replied, courteously, completely. I attached historical photos proving my home predated the palette. I cited grandfathering provisions. I wrote that imperfection isn't decay. It's authenticity baked into brick. I even included a moisture analysis. Because that's what engineers do when we're scared. We measure things we can't control. Their response came 2 days later. It thanked me for my engagement. Then it added something new. Unsafe structure concerns. 2 words that can turn a home into a crime scene. I inspected my house myself. No cracks. No shifting lintels. No hollow bricks. Nothing unsafe except the letter. That word unsafe had been weaponized. It was no longer a descriptor. It was permission. Soon my mailbox became a drumbeat. Letter after letter, each one colder. Each one stamped like a countdown. Neighbors got them too. Some painted over stone. Some replaced shutters just to sleep easier. Everyone complied. Compliance is contagious. But I didn't, because I wanted to see how far paper could go before it met something real. When the next HOA newsletter arrived, it celebrated our beautification milestone. Photographs of pristine facades, identical driveways, and smiling families cropped just below the eyes. Beneath it, a single line of data. Certification process established for abatement contractors. A sanitized way of saying, "We have the people who will tear you down." That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the chain of logic, each link locking into the next. From clause to notice to demolition. Processes don't need villains. They just need momentum. And Corinne had built one that didn't know how to stop. Sunday morning. Before sunrise, I walked the block. Fog hung low, and the sprinklers had just finished their rhythmic confession. Every house looked quiet, obedient, each one reflecting the same bland dream. Except mine. It stood there like it was thinking, like it knew something no one else did. I felt strangely proud and terrified, because defiance in this neighborhood was an architectural violation. By the end of the month, everyone called it by its true name. The Demolition Clause. No one admitted starting the nickname, but we all said it like superstition. Whispered careful, as if the papers might hear. Then came the inspection schedule. A PDF grid, promising efficiency. Starting 8, 00 a.m. on the east side, proceeding clockwise. My address sat dead center, like a bull's on a map someone had laminated. The inspectors arrived on time. A white SUV, HOA logo on the door. 3 people in identical windbreakers. Clipboards and tablets gleaming in the morning sun. They moved like auditors. Not humans. Measured walls. Photographed surfaces. Nodded silently. One of them tapped a crack in the mortar and wrote something. I wanted to tell him it was from the day the house was built. But silence seemed safer. When they left, I washed my hands. The sink filled with brick dust and irony. For the first time, the water looked like evidence. The letter came 4 days later. Unsafe structure determination. Official. Cold. Immaculate. It cited facade spalling, mortar degradation, and potential instability. It gave me 14 days to comply. It warned of board-certified abatement action, a bureaucratic euphemism for demolition. I flattened it under that same small stone again, pressing until the fibers creaked. Then I built my response. A binder, tabbed, labeled, indexed. Historical data. Structural analysis. Masonry reports. Load diagrams. A complete defense. Polite enough to be ignored. I hand-delivered the binder to the HOA office. The volunteer smiled, slid it into a wire-in basket, and thanked me for my cooperation. The office smelled like toner and false calm. A framed certificate read, "Excellence in Community Stewardship." I almost laughed. Stewardship, I thought, is just ownership with better handwriting. On the bulletin board behind her desk hung an ad. Certified abatement contractor, prompt, professional, precise. The logo was a cartoon excavator with a grin. I stared at it too long, because even the machine was smiling. The HOA's reply to my binder came 3 days later. Upon review, the board maintains its determination. Polite. Final. Empty. 7 days left. And a process already moving without me. Somewhere in those lines of code and compliance. A mistake was already waiting. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the countdown had begun. And the clause had teeth. When a machine turns, it doesn't stop to ask if it's aimed at the right thing. It just obeys the input. And in our HOA, the input was one name, mine. The next envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning. I remember the sound it made when I picked it up. Paper doesn't have a voice, but bureaucracy does. A crisp fold, an embossed seal, the dry whisper of command. That's how you know you're about to lose something you still live inside. The letter informed me that the board had certified my case for abatement. Certification. It's such a clean word for what it means, authorization. A green light for destruction. At the bottom of the page was the contractor's information. A name I'd seen before. The same one from the ad with the grinning excavator. That night, I sat at my desk surrounded by forms. Pages of correspondence, scan notices, copies of building code definitions. I arranged them in order, chronologically, like fossils in sediment. If I could map the layers, maybe I could find where the fault line began. But somewhere in the stack, I saw it. A small detail that didn't belong. It was a reference number. A parcel ID. I checked it against my deed, then against the county database. The numbers didn't match. 1 digit off. A single transposition, but enough to shift a legal boundary by several meters. The parcel they listed wasn't mine. It was 2 lots north. Corinne's lot. I stared at the screen. My pulse went hollow. Could it be that simple? Could all of this precision, the forms, the stamps, the procedural confidence, really rest on one mistyped number? It was almost beautiful in its absurdity. A system so obsessed with accuracy that it would destroy itself over a typo. I printed the parcel data, highlighted the mismatch, wrote a short cover letter calm, factual, unaccusatory. I explained the discrepancy, attached the evidence, and hand-delivered it to the clubhouse. The volunteer smiled again, said she'd make sure it reached the right hands. That phrase felt heavier than usual, because I wasn't sure whose hands were right anymore. 2 days passed, then 3. No reply. Only silence, that bureaucratic hush that feels like an engine idling behind a wall. On the 4th day, I received another envelope. I opened it carefully, already expecting vindication. Inside, final notice, demolition scheduled for Monday, 8:00 a.m. No mention of my letter. No correction. No hesitation. The process had decided to see itself through. I tried to call the number listed for the contractor. It rang once, then went to voicemail. A recorded message cheerfully informed me that they were currently assisting another valued client. Valued? That word again. In the language of compliance, value is measured by silence. I considered contacting the city inspector's office. But I already knew how that would go. They'd refer me to the HOA. The HOA would refer me to the contractor. The contractor would refer me to the paperwork. And the paperwork would just stare back, unblinking, perfect, wrong. Monday morning came faster than sense. I woke to the low, rhythmic hum of diesel engines idling at the end of the street. The sound moved through the pavement, into the bones of the house. It felt like a countdown you could feel in your feet. When I stepped outside, the street was already lined with cones and blinking hazard lights. A contractor's truck was parked in front of my neighbor's yard. Another idled across from my own. Men in safety vests moved like a choreographed swarm. Clipboards, radios, spray paint. All the tools of authorized violence. I walked across the lawn slowly, as if speed might make it real. One of the workers was marking a perimeter with orange paint. The line passed directly through my driveway. He didn't look up. He was tracing a map someone else had drawn. It was 7:52 a.m. The air smelled like diesel and morning dew. A crow landed on the power line above and started calling into the noise, like it was trying to compete with the machines. I watched a bulldozer back into position, its blade gleaming like a certificate. That's when I saw the supervisor holding a clipboard, and the address printed across the top. It wasn't mine. It was Corinne's. The numbers were clear as daylight, bold and centered. Her parcel, her coordinates. I opened my mouth to say something, but stopped. Because it hit me. No one would believe me until it was too late. They would need proof. And proof in this neighborhood only mattered once something was gone. So I stood there, watching the slow geometry of a mistake gather momentum. No one looked up. No one checked twice. The excavator turned toward the wrong house. Corinne's house. Her white colonial with the symmetrical shutters. The manicured shrubs. The perfect mailbox that had once held the very letters that condemned me. I could have stopped it, but part of me wanted to see what justice looked like when printed on the wrong line. I stood on the curb, hands in my pockets, as the first scoop of dirt came up. The noise was low and deliberate, like someone tearing paper in slow motion. The machine's hydraulic hiss was almost rhythmic, a bureaucratic heartbeat rendered in steel. Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by the sound. Phones out. Voices confused. But the crew didn't pause. They had orders. And orders, when written down, feel sacred. Then came the siren. A short, sharp wail that cut through the hum. And somewhere, someone finally realized. Not because of conscience, but because of a phone call. 911 dispatch log, summary excerpt. 07:58 a.m. Caller reports construction crew demolishing occupied property. Possible address error. Request city building inspector and police unit. 07:59 a.m. Contractor on site confirms demolition order paperwork, appears valid. 0801 a.m. HOA representative en route. 0803 a.m. Homeowner not present. Crew continues initial removal pending clarification. 0808 a.m. Dispatch notes probable clerical error, parcel misassignment. Unit instructed to halt work immediately. By the time the noise stopped, half her front porch was gone. Dust hung in the air like guilt. A mailbox leaned sideways, still bearing her name in gold vinyl. The letters shimmered in the morning light, as if trying to spell denial. The city truck arrived first, then the HOA vehicle. Karen stepped out, still in her workout clothes, holding a binder like a weapon that had misfired. She looked at her house, looked at the clipboard, then at me. Our eyes met for one long, silent second. No words, no gestures. Just the mutual understanding that a rule had finally devoured its maker. I stood perfectly still, not triumphant, not sorry, just aware of the weight of paper, and how sometimes it folds back on itself. The foreman approached Karen, papers in hand. I could read his body language, the disbelief of a man who trusted his clipboard more than his eyes. He pointed to the order, then to the house, and I watched realization crawl across his face like a shadow. He wasn't angry. He was procedural. He was already preparing the report. The police arrived last. Sirens subdued. They spoke to the foreman, to Karen, then to the city inspector. I stayed behind the yellow tape, hands in pockets, invisible as intent. No one asked me anything. No one even said my name. And maybe that was the truest form of justice. To watch a system erase itself, line by line, signature by signature. When the machines finally went quiet, the air was full of dust and irony. Karen stood there, binder at her side, staring at what used to be her perfect symmetry. Her clipboard trembled, just enough for one page to slip loose and flutter to the ground. A demolition order. Her own signature at the bottom, authorizing everything she'd built to be undone. I turned and walked home. The engines idled for a while longer, then one by one shut down. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was paperwork catching its breath. I sat at my desk that evening, window open, the smell of crushed wood and soil drifting in. The rock still sat atop my stack of letters. Same stone, same weight, but now beneath it, everything had shifted. The clause had reached its logical conclusion. It had enforced itself to death. The thing about destruction is that it doesn't stop just because someone notices. Momentum is a kind of faith. Once a process begins, it trusts itself too much to question. That Monday morning, the day the neighborhood woke to noise, I became a witness to what compliance looks like when it forgets to think. By 8:30 a.m., the street was cordoned off. Orange barriers, reflective vests, a city inspector's SUV parked diagonally across the intersection. Dust still hung in the air, coating windshields and mailboxes in a soft gray film. Everything smelled like pulverized memory. Paint, gypsum, and heat. I watched from my porch as the crowd gathered. Neighbors whispered in small, polite clusters. Phones filmed what disbelief could not explain. The sound of machinery had been replaced by the sound of paperwork being explained out loud. Each official spoke in fragments. Clerical error, improper parcel, temporary hold pending verification. But the damage was there, plain and geometric. The porch reduced to splinters. The front wall peeled open like the page of a house that had been overread. I could see into Karen's living room. Perfect symmetry undone. A grand piano listing sideways amid drywall dust. Its polished surface now dulled to matte. Her trophies, framed certificates, and community excellence plaques lay in a shallow heap at the base of what used to be her bay window. No one spoke to her directly. They spoke around her. That's how systems apologize. Indirectly, through forms and bystanders. She just stood there, binder clutched to her chest like it could still make sense of what it had done. From my lawn, I could hear the inspector speaking into a radio. Confirming parcel misalignment, one-digit transposition. Owner of adjacent lot unaffected. Repeat, unaffected. That last word hit me like a soft hammer. Unaffected. It sounded clinical. But standing there, watching the dust settle on her ruined symmetry, I didn't feel unaffected. I felt documented, as if the event had already been filed away. Even as it continued happening in front of us, I noticed then how sunlight moved through the haze, turning every floating particle into a glittering lie of beauty. Destruction looked cinematic in the right light. But beneath that glitter, you could smell what was lost. Paint, fabric, air conditioning filters, history. The police stayed until noon. By then, the machines had been silenced, but their tire tracks pressed perfect arcs into the lawn like fingerprints. Karen sat on the curb, phone in hand, scrolling through photos she couldn't unsee. She wasn't crying. She was cataloging. Even ruin becomes an itemized loss in a mind built for control. The city's temporary order arrived that afternoon. It was taped to what remained of her front door. Stop work, subject to investigation. A red tag. Bold letters. The kind of color that means guilt before trial. I recognized the document template. It was nearly identical to the one I'd been sent weeks before. Different name. Different parcel. Same authority. It's strange how paperwork recycles its shape even when the story changes. For the rest of that week, crews came and went, taking photos, measuring, sampling soil and debris. The air was full of clicking cameras and the muted percussion of clipboards closing. Each sound another layer of record. And through it all, the white dust lingered, not just on her property, but across driveways, lawns, and cars up and down the street. A soft, democratic ruin. The HOA board released a statement on Wednesday. A digital memo. It arrived in inboxes with the subject line: important clarification regarding recent construction incident. The text was sterile, detached, and full of the kind of phrasing that hides behind its own politeness. An unfortunate procedural error. Immediate corrective measures underway. Our thoughts are with all affected homeowners. Plural. Homeowners. But there was only one. Karen's house became a landmark of embarrassment. People slowed down as they drove by, rolled their windows up, then talked about it later like weather. The HOA began to quietly remove her name from documents, replacing her signature with a temporary acting president. The website banner changed. The email footer updated. Erasure moves faster than justice. By Friday, the house was fenced off entirely. A ring of orange mesh and metal posts. Its geometry precise. Almost beautiful again, if you ignored what it enclosed. The fence cast a shadow shaped like a cage. Inside, what remained of her front steps sat like broken teeth. The rest of the house open to the weather. The city scheduled a structural safety evaluation, which is how they describe the act of cataloging a corpse. The contractor's equipment stayed parked for 3 days. Engines cold, waiting for permission that would never come. Then one morning, they were gone. Just tracks in the dirt and a flattened patch of grass where the machines had slept. It rained that weekend. Not heavily, just enough to turn dust into paste. The runoff from Karen's lot flowed downhill, streaking the pavement with pale rivulets that settled at the storm drain. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as the water carried her home, dust away in quiet filaments. Down the gutter, into the drain, back to the same system that approved it all. I thought about the word compliance. It means obedience. but it also means flexibility, the ability to bend. Her house hadn't bent. It had broken cleanly, perfectly, according to plan. That's what systems prefer. Clean breaks. No irregularities to photograph. The next morning, a new notice appeared on the fence. White paper laminated against the rain. Pending city review, demolition site temporary closure. It was signed not by Karen Lowell, but by her successor, a man whose name I didn't recognize. The ink was fresh, the loops of his signature confident, as if he hadn't learned what paper was capable of. I stayed home that day. Not working, just listening. The neighborhood was quieter than usual. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe because the sound of machinery still lived in our ears. Every crack in the pavement felt louder. Every crow call echoed longer. And beneath it all, I could almost hear the shuffle of forms being filled out somewhere. New amendments, new clauses, new ways to fix what had broken the wrong way. Karen's house stood like that for weeks. A skeleton of a systems mistake. The plywood sheets they'd nailed across the openings started to warp in the sun. The nails rusted, staining the boards with orange tears. Each day, the light fell differently through the gaps, as if the house was trying to remember itself in pieces. Sometimes I caught glimpses of her, driving by slowly, sunglasses on, face unreadable. She never stopped, just slowed enough to look, then pressed the gas again, as if speed could undo the image. There are different kinds of hauntings. Some have ghosts. Ours had paperwork, and every page had her handwriting on it. Justice in suburbia doesn't come with sirens. It comes with photocopies. And in the weeks that followed the demolition, our neighborhood became a photocopy machine that couldn't stop running. Everything was under review. The city sent inspectors. The HOA board formed a special audit committee. The insurance companies opened case files. It was all motion, but no direction. Just pages moving through trays. Stamped, initialed, filed. Each one certain that its existence was progress. I kept my distance. I watched from my front porch, coffee cooling in my hand, as officials walked the street in pairs, clipboards glowing under noon light. They didn't look at me. They looked at their forms. A person only exists in their margins once you check a box. But I saw things. Small things. A folder left open on a car hood. An address circled in red. My own parcel number written below it. The correct one this time. Above it in a neat printed line was Lowell K., the woman who had built the system that swallowed her. Her name was now evidence. One afternoon, the city investigator parked his sedan halfway across my driveway. He didn't come to the door. He just sat there, idling, writing in a notebook. I stood behind the blinds, watching the reflection of sunlight crawl across his windshield. Every few minutes he flipped a page, then reached for a new sheet from a folder marked Exhibit B. It struck me how much an investigation looks like paperwork eating its young. Later that week, an envelope arrived from the city's Department of Building Safety. Not from the HOA. From above them. The letter was courteous, but colder than anything the HOA had ever sent. It requested a statement of observation regarding recent unauthorized demolition activity adjacent to your property. My home had become a reference point, a fixed coordinate for measuring loss. I wrote my response carefully. No emotion. No speculation. Just geometry. I described what I saw. The arrival of the machines. The address numbers visible on the clipboard. The sequence of events that followed. Facts are unassailable when you strip them of adjectives. I mailed it certified, watched the postal clerk stamp it, and walked out feeling like I'd handed gravity to someone else for safekeeping. The days that followed felt longer. Rumors began to circulate. that the demolition company was filing against the HOA, that the HOA's insurance had refused payout, that Karen had stepped back for personal reasons. No one said resigned. Resignation requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires ownership. Our community specialized in neither. By the end of the month, I noticed something peculiar. The mail that used to come daily from the HOA stopped. No newsletters, no reminders, no friendly updates, just silence and the faint sound of shredders in the clubhouse office. It's amazing how quickly a regime forgets its own stationery. Then one morning, a city truck arrived at the demolished lot. 2 inspectors stepped out, carrying a large gray plastic bin filled with files. They set it on the tailgate, opened the lid, and began sorting. Permits, approval letters, stamped forms, some still warm from the copier. Every few seconds, one of them muttered a number, and the other cross-referenced it with a spreadsheet. I walked over, slowly, pretending to retrieve my trash bin from the curb. The closer I got, the more I could see. Each form bore the HOA letterhead, and the same looping signature. Karen S. Dozens of them. Her name authorizing inspections. Her initials approving abatement contracts. Her handwriting confirming parcel compliance. It was all there. The full paper trail of self-destruction. She hadn't realized it when she signed. The clause that allowed demolition required board authorization. The parcel number was written manually. She had signed the wrong one. Her owned. It was procedural poetry. A symmetry of arrogance. The system hadn't betrayed her. It had obeyed her perfectly. Later that day, I received another envelope. This one from the city clerk's office. Inside was a notice titled, Public Record, Building Permit Audit, Case 140622. It included scanned pages, the full sequence of forms from initiation to order. And there it was, in black and white, Karen's signature authorizing demolition of parcel 1142B. Her parcel, mine was 1143B. 1 digit, 1 house. The audit trail was merciless. Time-stamped emails, digital approvals, automatic CCs. Each step documented, each step correct, until the world it described vanished. I flipped through the pages slowly, the paper whispering like confession. Each one felt heavier than the last. Bureaucracy doesn't die. It archives itself. By mid-afternoon, the news had spread beyond our street. Local reporters arrived, tripods sprouting like weeds along the sidewalk. They filmed the empty lot, the orange fencing, the puddles of dried cement, a microphone angled toward the fence, as if the ruin might give a quote. I watched the footage that night on the local channel. The headline read, Clerical Error Leads to HOA President's Home Demolition. The anchor's tone was gentle, almost amused, a suburban tragedy made palatable by distance. The footage panned over my street, my house in the background, the brick facade still standing, catching late light, whole and unbothered. They called it an ironic twist, but irony is just a polite word for inevitability. By the end of the week, a city notice was posted online. Following internal review, the demolition was conducted under a valid but misapplied order. No further action pending litigation. No apology. No admission. Just conclusion. The kind of ending that sounds final until you listen closely and realize it's just a pause. I printed the entire notice, folded it once, slid it into my binder under the section labeled Evidence, Post-Event. Then I closed it gently, as if tucking a body into rest. The next morning, I stepped outside just as the sun crested the rooftops. The air was cool, The street silent. I looked toward the empty lot. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a target. I felt like an annotation, a small footnote in someone else's correction. They say revenge feels good. It doesn't. It feels precise, like balancing an equation that no longer needs you in it. Time moves differently once something has been erased. The absence becomes the clock. Every day ticks forward from what's missing. And the lot where Karen's house once stood became the neighborhood's new hour hand. Weeks passed. The orange fencing stayed up. The grass didn't. Dust settled into thin drifts, blowing across the pavement and onto my driveway like gray pollen. A few stubborn pieces of concrete still poked through the soil. Rebar like veins. A bit of tile. A chunk of marble countertop embedded in mud. Every morning, the sun hit it from a slightly different angle, as if the earth was still adjusting its memory. I walked by the lot often, not to gloat, not even to remember, just to confirm it was real, that an idea could, in fact, undo itself. No one spoke about Karen anymore. Her name vanished from newsletters, from meeting minutes, from the HOA directory online. The replacement president signed his emails with a cheerful flourish, and always ended with building a better tomorrow. But his optimism felt like a sticker on broken glass. You could still see the crack running underneath. The HOA hired a landscaping crew to stabilize the property. They laid down straw netting, seeded grass, and posted a small sign that read, "Future Home Site." It looked optimistic, almost proud, like bureaucracy trying to regrow where it had burned. By October, the lot had grown soft with new grass. The fence came down quietly one morning. No announcement, no ceremony, just the sound of metal posts being pulled from the ground, one by one, leaving behind perfect circular holes like punctuation marks. Full stop, full stop, full stop. I never saw Karen again. Some said she moved to another development out by the lake. Some said she sued the contractor. Others said she sold the parcel to the city and left the state. I didn't check, because some ghosts don't need names to keep haunting you. One night a hard rain fell. It hammered the roofs, pounded the gutters, and turned the vacant lot into a shallow lake. When the storm cleared, I stepped outside barefoot, drawn by the glint of standing water under the streetlight. The surface reflected the sky, the same stars, the same clouds, but warped, as if the world itself had a crack running through it. From my driveway, I could see my own house reflected in that puddle, its brick facade doubled and inverted, suspended above the void where hers had been. For a moment, it looked like both houses still existed. One reeled, one remembered. Then the wind broke the surface, and the illusion rippled away. Days bled together after that. The HOA meetings continued. Agendas circulated. Motions passed. The same phrases returned like ghosts of themselves. Enhancing community. Maintaining standards. Protecting property values. But none of it sounded sharp anymore. Paper had lost its teeth. I noticed people became gentler with their homes. Fewer citations appeared. Fewer letters. The color of a door or the texture of a fence stopped feeling like rebellion. Maybe they'd learned something. Or maybe fear just moved underground. Quiet as groundwater, waiting for the next amendment to dig it up. Sometimes, when the sun hit my facade just right, the bricks would glow that deep human red, the color of endurance. I'd trace the lines of mortar with my eyes, and think of the day I almost lost them to a paragraph. All that stood between me and a bulldozer was a single miswritten number. Precision spared me, but irony finished the job. The lot stayed empty through winter. Snow softened the ground into anonymity. By spring, the grass returned greener, almost unnatural in its perfection. Neighbors stopped noticing it. Children cut across it on bikes. Eventually, it stopped being a scar. It became a shortcut. One evening, months later, I found a single sheet of paper in my mailbox. No envelope, no return address, just a folded letter with no greeting. It was a photocopy, one of the old HOA notices from before the demolition. My own, the one about non-conforming brick. At the bottom, someone had written in pen, "Paper never dies, it just waits." No signature, just that. I stared at it for a long time, then slid it under the small rock on my desk, where all the others had gone. A burial mound of correspondence. Sometimes at night, I still hear machinery in my dreams. The low, hydraulic rhythm of compliance. The whir of order correcting itself. Then I wake, and it's just the hum of my refrigerator. Modern comfort. Mechanical indifference. Hard to tell the difference anymore. In the end, there were no lawsuits I cared to follow. No official apologies that mattered. Only an empty lot. A missing house. And the quiet knowledge that every form carries its own undoing. Waiting for the right signature. On the first anniversary of the demolition, a real estate sign appeared on the lot. White post, fresh paint, plastic panel flapping gently in the wind. Available parcel, prime location. No mention of what used to be there. Just new lines, new numbers, new paper. I stood across the street and watched the sign sway. For a moment, I imagined someone else moving in someday. Planting new grass, laying new bricks, never knowing what lived there before. They'd sign a stack of forms, smile for the keys, and somewhere, in a file cabinet in the HOA office, the old records would still be there. Quiet, patient, waiting for another misalignment. That night, as the sun went down, I wrote one last line in my binder, beneath the final page of evidence. In the end, paper doesn't burn. It just buries what's left standing. Then I closed it, and for the first time in a long time, I let it stay closed. For more daily HOA stories, click like and subscribe.